Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to be tackling the future of the VA,
To VA.
the Department of Veterans Affairs.
Right. Yeah.
And, you sent us a chapter from Mandate for Leadership,
Mm-hmm.
and it's all about, potential shakeups by 2025.
Yeah.
This isn't just some, dry policy report. We're talking about real-world impacts on veterans' lives.
Right.
So let's break it down.
Okay.
Keep it clear and concise for everybody.
Yeah, that's good.
So, what I thought was really interesting in this chapter is how they kind of lay out like the VA's journey.
Yeah.
During the Obama years, wasn't seen in a very positive light. And then by 2020, it had become like one of the most respected agencies.
Yeah.
And now under the Biden administration, there's a whole new set of challenges.
What's fascinating here is the impact of leadership and kind of shifting priorities, right?
Yeah.
So the chapter really gives a lot of credit to Secretary Wilkie
Yeah.
and his focus on the veteran and what they call like a veteran-centric approach.
Right.
But it seems like the argument is that the current administration is kind of shifting away from that a little bit.
Right. And focusing more on internal issues like expanding the unionized workforce.
And that's where things get complicated.
Yeah.
Because the argument is that this shift in focus might mean less of a focus on providing care directly to veterans,
Right.
particularly through what's called community care.
Okay. Community care. So that's where veterans can get health care from like private doctors
Right.
instead of always having to go through the VA system.
Yeah, exactly.
So the chapter dives into this whole idea, particularly the VA Mission Act
Yes.
from back in 2018, which really opened the door for veterans to use private health care.
The Mission Act was a game changer in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But the author of this chapter argues that the current administration isn't fully utilizing the VA Mission Act.
Oh, really?
They even suggest there might be attempts to kind of slow down those referrals to private doctors, and they propose a pretty bold solution. They say there should be a Veterans Bill of Rights. Like, think of it as a clear, concise document that spells out exactly what benefits veterans are entitled to, including their right to choose community care.
So it's about more than just having options. It's about making sure veterans know what those options are
Exactly.
and that they have the power to make the best choice for themselves.
You got it.
Now, what about transparency?
Oh.
Does the chapter talk about that at all?
Yeah, the chapter also pushes for more transparency from the VA.
Okay.
And they suggest that the VA should publicly report things like the quality of care, how long veterans are waiting for appointments and how cost-effective their services are, kind of like what Medicare already does.
Oh, okay.
And the argument is that this would hold the VA accountable and encourage them to constantly improve.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, what about the VA's buildings and facilities?
Yeah.
The chapter mentions that a lot of them are pretty outdated
Mm-hmm.
and that the veteran population is changing. So how do they say that the VA should adapt?
This is where it gets really interesting because they actually suggest a shift away from pouring money into those old expensive hospitals.
Okay.
And instead, they propose investing in smaller community-based outpatient clinics.
So instead of veterans having to travel to these big centralized hospitals,
Right.
they could get care closer to home.
Exactly. It's about making things more convenient and accessible.
Okay.
They even suggest looking into sharing facilities with local health systems,
That's interesting.
which could be a really smart way to leverage those resources and reduce costs.
Okay, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the people who work at the VA.
Yeah.
The chapter spends a good chunk of time discussing recruitment, keeping good employees, and then this, hot button issue of remote work.
Yeah, that's a big one.
So how do they propose doing that? I mean, getting and keeping good people is tough these days.
Well, if we connect this back to the bigger picture, we see a workforce struggling to keep up with the changing needs of veterans.
Yeah.
And the author offers a couple of suggestions. First, they say extend the term of the Undersecretary for Health
Okay.
to ensure more continuity and consistent leadership. Then they recommend creating a specific CIO position.
Like a chief information officer?
Yes, for the VA care system. So basically a tech leader who can make sure that the VA is using technology effectively.
Right.
They even suggest piloting Saturday appointments
Oh, wow.
and extending clinic hours to try and cut down on wait times.
Okay.
And of course, they talk about offering competitive salaries and benefits.
Right, especially in fields like IT and cybersecurity.
Yes, where talent is in such high demand.
Yeah, it's tough out there.
Is.
Now, but they also seem a little bit hesitant about the whole remote work trend,
Yeah.
which, a lot of organizations are embracing these days.
They make a really interesting point.
Okay.
They argue that while remote work might be beneficial for some roles, it could actually make things less efficient in others,
Okay.
particularly leadership positions.
So their concern is that it could undermine teamwork,
Right.
accountability, and responsiveness.
Exactly.
So they're not against it entirely, but they're saying it needs to be approached carefully.
Right. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution.
Now let's talk about the part of the VA that probably has the biggest impact on most veterans. The Veterans Benefits Administration, the VBA.
The VBA.
This is the part that handles disability claims and all those other benefits that veterans have earned through their service.
Right.
And this chapter doesn't hold back.
Yeah.
They're basically saying the VBA needs a total overhaul.
They're definitely critical.
Okay.
Their argument is that the VBA is way too complicated.
Yeah.
And that veterans often have to wait way too long to get the benefits they deserve.
Right.
And they describe the process as confusing, which just makes it even more frustrating.
That's definitely not what you want to hear if you're a veteran who's relying on those benefits.
No, it's not.
So what do they propose?
Well, they suggest setting clear, measurable goals for the VBA.
Okay.
And then making those goals public so everyone can see how they're performing and hold them accountable.
So more transparent.
Transparency is huge in this chapter.
Makes sense.
They even propose a pilot program to try and process first-time disability claims within 30 days.
Wow, 30 days. That seems incredibly ambitious. How do they think that's even possible?
They're banking on technology, specifically automation.
Okay.
They believe that by leveraging technology to streamline the processes, improve accuracy, and reduce the reliance on manual labor, they can dramatically reduce processing times.
So bring the VBA into the digital age.
Exactly.
Sounds like a major undertaking.
It would be, no doubt.
Okay, this is a lot to digest.
It is.
I have a feeling it's just the tip of the iceberg.
Oh, yeah. There's more.
We'll be back in a moment to dive even deeper into this fascinating chapter and see what other insights we can unearth.
You know, one of the things that really stood out to me in this chapter is how much emphasis they put on the changing demographics of veterans.
Right, like the fact that, veterans are living longer and there are fewer Vietnam-era veterans enrolling in VA healthcare these days.
Yeah.
So what does the chapter say about how the VA should adapt to these changes?
Well, it's all about recognizing that the VA can't just keep doing things the way they've always been done.
Right.
They need to be thinking about, the needs of a younger generation of veterans who might have different expectations and preferences.
So does that tie back into this whole debate about community care?
It could.
Are younger veterans maybe more likely to want to see private doctors outside of the VA system?
That's a real possibility. And remember, the author is a big advocate for giving veterans more choice in where they receive their care.
Right.
And they seem to believe that some in the current administration aren't fully embracing the potential of community care.
Oh, really?
And they're worried that, those access standards might be manipulated to slow down referrals to private doctors.
They even suggest writing those access standards into law.
Yes.
So that no future administration could ignore them. It's about making sure that veterans have consistent and reliable access to the care they need, whether it's through the VA or community care.
Right. It's about putting the veterans' needs front and center.
Okay.
And that's what they mean by a veteran-centric approach.
That makes sense. Now, what about this whole issue of the VA's aging infrastructure?
Yeah.
We were talking before about how some of those big old hospitals are, outdated and expensive to maintain.
Right. And this is where the author gets really creative.
Okay.
They suggest that instead of sinking more money into those outdated facilities, the VA should focus on expanding those smaller community-based outpatient clinics.
The CBOCs.
The CBOCs that are closer to where veterans actually live.
I can see the logic there.
Yeah.
It would allow the VA to be more responsive to shifting population patterns and provide care in a way that's more convenient for veterans.
And potentially more cost-effective, too.
Right.
They even go so far as to suggest exploring partnerships where the VA could share facilities with local health systems. That could be a really smart way to leverage existing resources and avoid unnecessary spending.
It's like thinking outside the box and finding innovative solutions.
Exactly.
Now let's shift gears again and talk about the people who work at the VA.
Okay.
We touched on this before, but the chapter goes into some detail about the challenges of recruiting and retaining qualified employees.
It's a huge issue.
Especially in a competitive job market like we have right now.
Yes.
So what are some of their suggestions?
Well, they lay out several.
Okay.
First, they talk about extending the term of the Undersecretary for Health to provide more stability.
Okay.
Then they recommend creating a dedicated CIO position for the VA care system to make sure they're keeping up with technology. They even suggest piloting Saturday appointments and expanding clinic hours to try and reduce wait times.
Okay.
And of course, they emphasize the importance of offering competitive salaries and benefits.
Right, especially in those high-demand fields where people have lots of other options. But they also raise some interesting points about the whole remote work trend, which has become so prevalent since the pandemic.
Right.
I was intrigued by their perspective on this.
Yeah, they're not necessarily against remote work,
Okay.
but they urge caution.
Okay.
They argue that while it might be beneficial for some roles, it could actually be detrimental in others,
Okay.
particularly leadership positions.
So their concern is that it could undermine teamwork, accountability, and responsiveness.
Exactly.
It's kind of a double-edged sword.
It is. They advocate for a balanced approach,
Okay.
one that carefully considers both the benefits and drawbacks of remote work.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all solution.
Right.
Now let's delve into a part of the VA that probably generates a lot of strong feelings.
Uh-huh.
The Veterans Benefits Administration, or VBA.
VBA.
This is the part of the VA that handles disability claims and all those other benefits that veterans have earned through their service.
Right.
And this chapter is pretty blunt in its assessment.
They are.
They're saying the VBA needs a major overhaul.
They don't mince words.
Oh.
They argue that the VBA is too complex, too inefficient,
Yeah.
and that veterans often face long delays and confusing processes when trying to access the benefits they deserve.
Right.
They paint a picture of a system that's just not working as well as it should be.
Which is incredibly frustrating for veterans who are relying on these benefits.
Absolutely.
So what's their solution? How do they propose fixing something as big and complex as the VBA?
Well, they have a few key recommendations.
Okay.
First, they advocate for setting clear, measurable performance targets for the VBA.
Okay.
And then publicly reporting on those targets so everyone can see how they're doing and hold them accountable.
So transparency is a big theme here.
Transparency is huge in this chapter.
Okay.
They also propose a pilot program to try and process first-time disability claims within 30 days.
30 days? That seems incredibly ambitious. How do they think that's even achievable?
Their answer is technology.
Okay.
Specifically automation. They believe that by leveraging technology to streamline the processes, improve accuracy, and reduce reliance on manual labor, they can dramatically reduce processing times.
So bring the VBA into the digital age.
Exactly.
It sounds like a massive undertaking, but potentially transformative if they can pull it off.
It would be a huge shift. They even suggest partnering with private companies that have expertise in this kind of automation and digital transformation.
So bringing in outside expertise to help modernize the VBA.
Exactly.
Now, shifting gears a bit, there's a section in the chapter that gets into a pretty sensitive topic.
Okay.
Disability benefits.
Yeah.
It seems like the author is concerned about this increasing pressure to grant disability benefits for a wider range of health conditions.
Right.
Some of which might only be loosely connected to military service.
It's a complex issue.
It is.
The author seems to be worried that expanding eligibility too broadly could lead to unsustainable costs for the VA
Right.
and potentially dilute benefits for veterans with more severe service-connected disabilities.
So it's about finding the right balance.
Yeah.
Making sure that veterans who truly need those benefits are taken care of without putting undue strain on the system.
Exactly. It's a delicate balancing act.
Yeah.
The chapter specifically mentions the Schedule for Rating Disabilities,
Which is also known as the VASRD.
also known as the VASRD, yes.
Right.
This is basically a system that assigns disability ratings to different health conditions.
Right.
And the author suggests that the next administration should take a close look at the VASRD and potentially streamline it to control costs.
I can imagine that would be a very politically charged issue.
Absolutely. But the author argues that it's a necessary step to ensure the long-term viability of the VO disability benefits system.
So it's about making tough choices to protect the integrity of the system.
Exactly. And this brings us to another point that the author emphasizes throughout the chapter.
Okay.
The need for strong leadership at the VA.
Right.
They argue that the VA needs leaders who are not afraid to make tough decisions, who are willing to challenge the status quo, and who are truly committed to serving veterans.
It's about having leaders who are both visionary and pragmatic,
Yes.
who can see the big picture but also know how to get things done.
Exactly. They need to be able to navigate those complex challenges.
Right.
Balance competing priorities.
Yeah.
And make decisions that are in the best interests of veterans, even if those decisions aren't always popular.
It's a tall order, but incredibly important for the future of the VA.
Absolutely. And that's why this chapter is so thought-provoking.
Yeah.
It raises some tough questions.
It does.
And it challenges us to think critically about how we can best serve our veterans.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground here today. We've explored the challenges facing the VA.
We have.
The author's proposed solutions, and the importance of strong leadership.
Right.
But there's still more to unpack. We'll be back after a quick break to delve into the final section of this chapter, which focuses on the critical areas of human resources and administration. So we're back, and we're diving into this final section of the chapter, which focuses on human resources and administration.
All right.
And, this might not sound as exciting as, say, community care or, new VA facilities.
Yeah.
But it's actually crucial to how the whole system functions.
It really is. The author makes a strong case for why, strong leadership and effective management are so essential within the VA.
Yeah.
It's like the foundation of a house. You can't have a, strong, well-functioning system without it.
So what are some of the key points they make about how to improve the VA's human resources and administration?
Well, one of the big recommendations is to rescind some of the authority that was delegated during the previous administration and to transfer all career senior executive service members out of politically appointed positions.
It sounds like they're pushing for greater political control over the VA.
It's certainly a possibility. They're definitely advocating for kind of a shift in how things are structured.
Right.
They also emphasize the need to really take a hard look at the effectiveness of these hybrid and remote work arrangements.
I remember them being a bit critical of remote work in earlier sections.
Right.
Are they saying it's not working out for the VA?
I think it's more nuanced than that.
Okay.
They're not saying it's a complete failure.
Okay.
But they're urging the VA to, carefully assess whether these arrangements are really helping or hurting things.
Right.
Like teamwork, accountability, and responsiveness.
So making sure that remote work is actually benefiting the VA and ultimately the veterans they serve.
Exactly.
It makes sense to kind of, regularly evaluate what's working and what's not.
Yeah.
Especially with something as significant as, how and where people work. What else does the chapter highlight in terms of human resources?
Well, they talk a lot about the need for a really strong benefits package, one that's competitive enough to attract and retain top talent.
Right.
Especially in fields like IT acquisition and cybersecurity, where there's fierce competition for skilled workers.
They also suggest, exploring new ways to recruit people and really maximize existing programs.
Right.
Like student loan forgiveness, making the VA a more attractive place to work.
Yeah, and they specifically say focus on hiring veterans and military spouses.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, who better to understand the needs of veterans, of those who have served themselves or have family members who have served?
Exactly.
It's about bringing that lived experience into the VA.
You got it.
And it's not just about hiring the right people.
Right.
It's also about fostering a culture of service and responsiveness within the VA.
Exactly. Creating an environment where, employees feel empowered and supported to provide the best possible service to veterans.
So creating a workplace where people feel valued and motivated to do their best work.
Absolutely. And of course, no discussion of human resources would be complete without mentioning labor unions.
Right.
The chapter acknowledges that, the VA needs to manage its relationship with organized labor effectively.
Right. It's about finding that balance between supporting employees' rights and ensuring that the VA can operate efficiently and effectively.
It's a tough one.
Now, are there any other specific structural changes that the author recommends?
There are a couple.
Okay.
First, they suggest sunsetting the Office of Accountability and Whistleblower Protection.
Okay.
Arguing that it duplicates existing mechanisms and might not be necessary.
So streamlining the structure and eliminating redundancy.
That's the idea, and they also propose separating the Human Resources and Administration Office from the Office of Security and Preparedness.
I see how those might be seen as having distinct functions.
Right. The argument is that, their responsibilities are different enough that they be better managed separately.
Makes sense.
It's all about improving, efficiency and effectiveness.
So it sounds like this author believes that some pretty significant changes are needed within the VA to really make it work better for veterans.
Absolutely. And they're not shying away from, potentially controversial recommendations,
Right.
really pushing for a more, streamlined and centralized approach to human resources management.
And it's all about, making sure that the VA has the right people in the right positions with the right skills and the right mindset to truly serve veterans well.
That's it.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
Yeah, this chapter was dense.
We've explored the challenges facing the VA,
Yeah.
the author's proposed solutions, and really kind of the importance of strong leadership at all levels.
Absolutely.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into this chapter from Mandate for Leadership, what's the biggest takeaway you'd want our listener to walk away with?
I think the key takeaway is that the future of the VA is not set in stone. It's something that we can all have a voice in shaping. Whether you're a veteran, a family member, or just a concerned citizen. It's crucial to be informed about the issues, engage in the conversation, and hold our leaders accountable. The choices we make today will have a profound impact on the lives of millions of veterans for years to come.
It's a powerful reminder that we all have a role to play in ensuring that the VA is fulfilling its mission to serve those who have served our country.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
This deep dive has given us a lot to think about, and hopefully it's inspired you to stay engaged in this important conversation. Thanks for joining us.